Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another top 10 player ranking for Survivor US, and this is a topic that I always thought was kind of interesting here, as it's really one I've never properly thought through before. And again, this will be kind of a mini series here. There will be 2 rankings based around this concept, and this will be me ranking players based on their initial seasons. Which again, typically when I do player rankings on this channel, it's either based around a specific game that they played on one of their individual seasons, or based on their entire career, or even based around different times in Survivor history. But this is going to be a ranking here that will include all of Survivor history up to this point, at least up to the end of Survivor 43, but we'll only be including information that we gathered through their first appearances. And we'll be assessing these players on a grander scale, but only based around how they played on their first appearance. Now, obviously, I've already done a top 10 non-winning one-time player ranking, and this is essentially that list, but adding in these players that have played multiple times, but again, only using their first time playing as evidence for this ranking. So again, this will be the non-winning version of that topic. I'll also be doing essentially a part 2 to this video where I'll be then ranking the list including winners, so stay tuned for that. But again, here we're just going to be talking about non-winning players in their first appearance. So again, this list can technically include players that did win on their second, third, or fourth appearances, though interestingly, there aren't any on this list or in the honorable mentions, which I did find kind of curious, and I think really just shows you the importance of threat level coming into returning seasons. But here, obviously, I want to run through the honorable mentions first, which I do have quite a bit of. So I'll be going through them in order of when they originally played. So let's start off very early on here with Colby from Survivor Australian Outback, who, again, was definitely a contender here. However, a very obvious issue here is the fact that this is a game from Australian Outback, a game that, while he did show himself to be a well-rounded player for the time, again, in the modern day, I don't know how that would translate. So again, didn't make the top 10. Then we got Lex from Survivor Africa, one that, again, also pretty well-rounded player, though, again, still had an old school mentality. I don't know if he would have killer instinct in the game, plus also was not the greatest at jury management, so I did not put him on the list. Did not put Kathy Vavrick O'Brien on the list, though she was kind of close, but I think at the end of the day, Kathy is someone that I wouldn't have looked at as super consistent coming out of Marquesas. Again, she was someone that was on the bottom of her original tribe and was probably on her way out if she ever went to tribal. And I do think on her return, I wouldn't know if she'd be consistent enough there. Plus also, I think she kind of wasted a couple opportunities to better her position along the way. So again, didn't quite put her on. Did not put on Ian from Survivor Palau, who I have had on some previous lists. However, decided to not have him here, mainly because I do think my opinion on his game has kind of gone down over time. While I do think he, again, kind of dominated the game alongside Tom and did have the killer instinct to go and try to cut Tom. At the point that he gets ratted out, obviously he kind of has this meltdown that really just makes me think he's not cut out for the game. So again, I didn't include him here. Also did not include in Rafe, who is someone that, again, was also on that non-winning one-time player list. And I think Rafe is a very strong social player. I do think strategically he's a bit lacking at points. I do think he plays pretty emotionally at points. And also, I think there might be some inconsistency with Rafe to where I'm not super confident how he would do on most appearances. So again, didn't put him on this list. Sadly here, I do also have to talk about Suri, who I just very much question how I would have felt about Suri after Panama, with her being a player that I don't think I would have had much faith in her on a return, of thinking of her being this person that's very likely to go home early. And even here in Panama, we saw her be the initial target in that first round. And I just feel like I would not feel super confident about Suri after just her first appearance, so she didn't make it on. Also did not put on Ozzy, as really Ozzy's first time around, I don't think he really showed that much strategic ability. Actually showed some actively bad strategic ability in him throwing the challenge in the second round to take out Billy Garcia. So while he was very impressive in terms of physical challenges, I felt like that was about it from his Cook Islands game. So again, I did not put him on. Then we jump all the way from Cook Islands to Blood versus Water, where I'll talk about Hayden here, who I did kind of struggle with a bit. Again, I've always been a bit perplexed on where exactly to place Hayden on a Survivor player ranking, and if I should be including context from Big Brother in that. However, I decided to leave that off, and I have in previous videos as well, to where while he did make a very impressive play at the final 6, I do feel like he kind of missed other opportunities to take control of the game. So again, I did leave him off here. Also left off Carolyn Rivera from Worlds Apart, who I think demonstrated herself as a pretty well-rounded player, though also I think had some pretty poor jury management, didn't really have a lot of the jury respecting her. And when she was coming into Final Tribal, originally in third place, where Will Sims would have gotten more votes than her, I think that's kind of sad. So again, I didn't put her on the list. Also did not put on Rodney, who again I think had a pretty impressive game on Worlds Apart by the end of it. However, I do feel like, again, jury management, I'm not sure if he's all entirely there and still can act emotionally at points, so I didn't put him on. Also did not put on Aubrey from Go Wrong, and again, this was one where she was very, very close to being on. She was actually on my initial draft of the list. However, I did knock her off just due to the fact that I feel like if this was immediately after Go Wrong, I would think that there's a lot of inconsistency with her, and the fact that we did see her have this meltdown immediately on Go Wrong, so that's an issue, plus also the fact that she was potentially going to be the merge boot until she got saved by the Neil Medevac, and then also the fact that, again, the jury did not respect her on that season, and she wasn't able to get them to see the game that she actually played, and I feel like because of those things, I would leave her off at the time of Go Wrong. Also from Go Wrong, I did leave off Sydney, who I do think is a very impressive player as well. However, I think Sydney also really lacked in jury management, to where a block of the jury did not really respect her game. Plus also, I feel like she as well kind of missed some opportunities to take further control of the game that I think would have benefited her, though again she didn't, so again I left her off here. Also ended up leaving off Chrissy, again another situation where I do feel like jury management was very lacking with Chrissy. Also, I think she had moments where she played pretty emotionally, plus also the fact that I think she might have a danger spot early on in the game. And we even saw in, again, HHH, that she was really struggling at the very beginning. So again, I feel because those things left her off. Next one's a big one because this was one I definitely considered for this list. Again, another one that just barely didn't make the list, and that person is Devin Pinto. And for me, Devin's pretty much 11 on this list. I think Devin came off as an extremely well-rounded player on HHH. However, I think the biggest criticism of his game is the fact that many people didn't see his game, to where despite him playing this very savvy game on HHH, if he were to go to Final Tribal, it's not even a guarantee that he would have won against Ryan and Chrissy, who were also people who are not particularly well liked by the jury. So I do feel like the fact that he was so underestimated to the point where no one saw him as that viable of a winner at the time that he goes home is something that I do have to question of his overall game ability at this point. Is something that did end up leaving him off the list. From David vs. Goliath, I am going to include Mike White here, who I just feel like Mike White is a player that's a bit inconsistent based on the information that we currently have. Again, I just feel like he's a player that is in a bit of danger early on, like while he is very good socially, and I think played a very impressive game by the end of David vs. Goliath. I do think his early days were also very rocky, and I could definitely see him being an early boot on any given season. But those are all the honorable mentions I have here, so let's start talking about the top 10. And at number 10, we're starting off with a player that I believe has risen a bit since my last list involving this person. But this is also one of the few people on this list that has still to this day only played one time. And at number 10, we do have Lauren Ashley Beck from Survivor IOI. And Lauren here for me is a player that I just think is all around a very solid player. I think she's good at all three aspects. I think her specialty, though, is her social game. I do think she is very good socially, very good at building one-on-one bonds. She's very good at building relationships with the opposition. However, I think the biggest issue for Lauren for me, the reason why she's at the bottom of the top 10 here, is I do think she gets completely outplayed by Tommy on her season. Where despite her running the game alongside Tommy, Tommy is able to outmaneuver her at every step. Where Tommy is able to get to the end game of all the people that are closer to him than they are to Lauren. Where Lauren lets go of figures that are closer to her along the way. So again, that's my main criticism of Lauren's game, but outside of that, she still gets to the tail end of the game with a lot of win equity. I mean, if she sneaks her way into the end there, I do think she is a very likely winner. When mixing that in with also her pretty strong game ability, that does leave her here for me at number 10. On number 9, and really for a bit here, we're on a pretty decent stretch here of players that have played multiple times. But again, we'll be solely basing this on their first appearance. And at number 9, we're going to be talking about Amanda KIMMEL. So obviously her game in China, which I think just through China, I would already think of Amanda KIMMEL as a very solid all-around player. I think she is the top woman that comes to my mind in terms of consistency in getting to the merge, where I think if you take out threat level from returning seasons, I really just do not see how Amanda gets taken out in the pre-merge phase of the game. I think her alongside Andrea are probably the two players I see as some of the most consistent players in making deep runs. I think just from China, I would have already gotten that assessment from her. But then mixing that in with the fact that she seemed to have a killer instinct. I mean, while again, she does fail to eventually take out Todd, she still was the one that pulled the trigger on the James move, and just overall seemed to have a pretty strategic mind for the game. I think socially she is fine. I mean, I don't think she's great, as I do feel like she's one of these type of people that are good with the people that she's working with, but the people she's not working with don't feel much of a connection to her, and that is obviously an issue. And obviously the biggest issue of it all is her poor final tribal performance. But again, I just feel like overall from just China, I would already look at Amanda as a very consistent player, and for me that would be enough for the lander here if she were to play again. And because that, for me, she lands here number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to probably a controversial pick here. A player that is obviously not well respected in the modern day. However, I feel like just based off of their first appearance, I would still be pretty high on this player, and that person is Russell Hantz. And obviously Russell Hantz has the fundamental flaw of not understanding how a jury works. And that is something we've seen numerous times now. However, again, if we're only basing this off of Samoa, I still think Russell Hantz is a very solid player. Again, he is a player that was able to play well from the bottom and be able to flip over an entire power structure by utilizing idols, and also his deal-making ability with the opposite side in order to overturn a 4-8 deficit. I mean, Russell does some very impressive work on Survivor Samoa. However, I think the issue here is that he gets very cocky when he's on top, where once he gets the majority, obviously he does become very braggadocious to where he does irritate the jury. But even then, like, I don't find that much fault in his Samoa game, especially in comparison to his later games that he ends up playing. Like, while there is obviously a misunderstanding in his journey management and just in Samoa, I feel like if I'm just basing it off of Samoa, I would be under the assumption that he would be able to fix that if he were to come back. And considering how effective he was at many portions of this game, for me, he does end up landing here number 8. And number 7, we're moving on to a player that I would be worried about this player in terms of their consistency. However, I do think their first appearance had a lot of impressive gameplay within it, and that is David Wright from Millennials vs. Gen X. And again, like, I think David, just in general, I would be worried about him in the early few rounds. Again, some of the honorable mentions I talked about, from the likes of Sari to Mike White to Chrissy, Kathy, and Aubrey, like, all those people are people that I mentioned this worry early on in the game. So the question might be of why is David Wright on this list then? And really the answer here is that I feel like David, through his first season, showed that he's a lot more versatile than those players. Having a knack for finding idols and using them in interesting ways, also able to cultivate an alliance together that was able to be loyal enough to where they went to Rocks. Also ends up squeezing his way to the end game to where he was 1 vote away from winning in a unanimous vote. I mean, David Wright, while he does have the issue of consistency from just his Millennials vs. Gen X game, I do feel like his other pros are far and away better than the other players we talked about, again, based on his first season. So because of that, for me, he lands here at number 7. Now, number 6, we're moving on to a player that I also have some reservations with, but I do feel like they demonstrate a lot of strong game ability the first time around, and that person is Johnny Fairplay. And obviously Fairplay, I think, has a couple issues here. First up in the fact that his journey management was a bit suboptimal. I mean, not Russell Hantz levels or anything too astronomically bad, but he did definitely burn some jury votes along the way. And while in Pearl Islands in particular, if he was up against Lil, it wouldn't have mattered. I do feel like at the end of the day, again, that's not a great sign for his game. Also, he got called out for being a snake relatively early on in his season. Again, he tries that coup against Rupert and fails. However, I do feel like he demonstrated a lot of good game ability as well. Again, I think he was a very dynamic player, especially for a time that he played, innovating upon the Rob Cesternino strategy and executing it very well. Also, an understated thing about Johnny Fairplay is that he is a hard worker around camp, and he is not a terrible challenge performer to where I do feel like he is someone that I would expect to do relatively well on most given seasons, outside of obviously the fact that he is Johnny Fairplay. And I feel like that is a big worry on a returnee season. which obviously we see on Micronesia actually not work against him, but the fact that he is as big of a name as he is and as big of a villain as he is definitely something to note there, though I do think overall I would look at Johnny Fairplay as a very impressive player from his first time around, near expertly navigating through the game, and even at the points where he fails, he's able to recover really quickly, with him repairing his relationship with Rupert after trying to blindside him, and also causing a fight between Dara and Lil when he seemed to be on the bottom. So again, I think Fairplay has some very impressive play there. That does leave him here at number 6. Now number 5, we're moving on to a player that I do think over time, my opinion on this player continues to go down, though again, if we're only basing it off their first game, not any other information outside that, I will say at number 5, I do have Rob Cesternino. And again, Rob is a player that obviously innovated on the game of Survivor. I mean, the way that he dynamically approached the end game of the Amazon is very impressive. While I do question some of the decision making he makes, again, at the end of the day, he does show this game ability to flip between alliances and also innovates on creating the strategy of taking out a swing vote, while also still being in a position where he could still win, despite that not being the norm for more aggressive gameplay back then. Where again, I do think he easily beats Matthew, and it comes down to one vote with Jenna. Like, I do think he comes pretty close to winning that game, despite playing with this cutthroat nature that was not the norm back in Survivor the Amazon. But also, I think outside of that, he is also a very good social player, where he was very good at building these bonds and finding himself within a majority. And I do feel like he's competent enough physically to where I wouldn't expect him to be an early boot on any given season. Now again, with his threat level, I mean, yeah, I think that is enough, but I think if you just plop him into any random newbie season where no one knows who he is, I do think he is pretty poised to do well most of the time. And considering that and how he innovated upon the strategy of Survivor, for me, he does end up being here number 5. Now, number 4, we're moving on to a player I've always looked at as having played one of the best non-winning games, and at number 4, we do have Stephen Fishback from Tocantins. And this is kind of a weird one because obviously he ends up being a 0 vote finalist against JT, and also ends up fumbling final tribal, to where I think that kind of taints people's outlooks on Steven's game, though in reality, again, he runs the game alongside JT at the point where I think he is the main strategic decider of the two, and he does get his way more times than not in these conflicts with JT. I mean, we see him get into a final 3 scenario with Aaron. Aaron's someone that is also going to cut JT and take Steven with her, to where he would beat her at the end. And I do think that was a purposeful move made by Steven. And really, I think that's also the thing that props him up here, is I do think Steven has this killer instinct. While he's never able to actually make the move in taking out JT, I do think he was willing to make the move. But due to JT winning out at the end, he just never had the chance to actually do so. But if he did, he more than likely wins. I mean, I do think Steven wins a jury vote against pretty much everybody but JT. Now, my main hesitancy for not putting him higher on the list is that I do feel like I would worry very early on for him. Not as much as I would for a David Wright or any of the people that didn't quite make the top 10, but I do feel like the fact that he is very clearly in this nerdy archetype, that could sketch some people out from the beginning, though I do think overall Stephen Fishback played a very strong game, and I would have expected him to do very well without any stigma against him on a return, so because that, I had him at number 4. Now, number 3, we're moving on to what is actually the last returning player on this list, where the top 2 actually end up being both people who have only played one time at this point. But at number 3 here, the top of the returnees ends up being Malcolm. Obviously talking about his game from Philippines, and again, I was extremely high on Malcolm coming out of Philippines. I do think Malcolm is a player that, again, considering he comes 1 vote away from winning in pretty dominant fashion there, obviously that is a pretty good look, even though realistically he does mismanage his threat level across the season. Really, that's the greatest flaw of Malcolm as a whole, is I do think his mismanagement of his threat level, but really his threat level is also something that props him up, and the fact that the reason why he is a threat is because he is such a perfect, well-rounded player here. He is very good at all 3 facets of the game. He is such a likable person, to where I can't imagine Malcolm getting to the end and not being rewarded the win. He is a very strategic player and has this killer instinct, to where he was willing to cut Denise way before Denise was willing to cut him. Also physically, again, he's great in these team challenges and also wins a decent amount of immunity challenges on Philippines. Again, he is a very impressive player across Survivor Philippines. I feel like the major knock here is his wishy-washiness. I do feel like obviously that costs him the game in Philippines of him not fully dedicating to outright lying to Denise's face, and that's an issue. Overall, outside that, I would have looked at him as a very, very impressive player after his first appearance, and because of that, for me, he's here number 3. Now number 2, and this is interesting because before 43, there was a very definitive number 1 for me. However, I did feel like 43 did shake it up a bit. Again, there is a player here that rivals that number 1 spot, but I didn't quite make it. At number 2, I do have Jesse. And again, I think Jesse played a very impressive game. Again, I said this before. I think up until the final 6, I think Jesse played a pretty perfect game. And his execution of the Cody blindside is one of the best moves I have ever seen in terms of the pure execution of it. Now again, it does make his threat level go over the roof to where at that point he needs to win out, but really again, like just an incredible game up to that point, and I feel like it's a very repeatable game for Jesse, to where outside of the fact of now he would be a threat on return just due to the fact of obviously how good of a player he is perceived to be, I do feel like he plays a game that he is expertly able to play the middle, and I feel like he would be able to do that on most given appearances. However, the main difference for me between Jesse and the one in the number 1 spot is the ability to win out, where I feel like Jesse is a player that doesn't have that ability. To where essentially, like after his first appearance here, I feel like Jesse comes off very similar to the first appearance of Suri, but actually a more refined version of that, which is why he's so high on this list. Where unlike Suri, who I think has some major down points, especially early on in Panama, Jesse never really has that on 43. And I feel like just in general, I wouldn't expect Jesse to be an early boot on most given seasons. But considering his lack of comp ability, and also just being kind of fine at making fire to where there's certainly a good chunk of people that would beat him, I do think that definitely lessens my overall thought on his win equity, as I just don't know if he's ever going to be able to win his way to the end, as opposed to the next person we'll be talking about. Now, I will say that I think technically Jesse has less holes in his game than the next person we'll be talking about, as I think Jesse had a very clear win if he got to the end, while the next person clearly didn't. But I think at the end of the day, for me, a lack of consistency in the end game is what does leave Jesse here at number 2. Now number 1, the number 1 non-winning player, again, remains the same for my non-winning one-time player list. And at number 1, we do have Dominic. And again, Dominic is the player to come the closest to winning the game without actually winning the game. And again, for me, I actually did feel like Jesse gave him a run for his money here. Now, I think Dominic's game was more out there. I think it was more out in front, more clearly a dominant game. But also, I feel like has some bigger holes. I think in terms of jury management, I think there's more points where Dominic is burning jury votes along the way. I think in terms of win equity, like clearly, Dominic doesn't win when he gets to the end, though to be fair, he comes obviously very, very close and did come in the final tribal with 5 absolute locked votes, which is half of the votes. He just needed to get one more and he doesn't, which is a failing of his. But again, that is an issue in comparison to Jesse. But again, for me, the pro that elevates Dominic above Jesse is I would have way more confidence in Dominic to win out if he needed to. Or again, this is a ranking based on how I feel of them as players, not them in terms of their games that they played. And with that, comp ability and fire making ability does factor in here. And I do feel like Dominic is a player I would have a lot of confidence in a fire making challenge. Or based on what we've heard, he is one of the best fire makers to ever be on the show. And then also adding in the fact that he is very competent in competitions, I would have so much more faith in Dominic to be able to get his way to the end of the game than Jesse. Even though I think Jesse probably has a smoother ride to the back portion of the game. But again, it was extremely close between the two. I do think they are two very impressive non-winning players, both with very different cons to their respective games, but I just feel like at the end of the day, I would have more faith in Dominic to get to the very end, and because that he is here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 non-winning players based on their first appearance. Now again, I will be doing a similar video, but including winners down the road, so stay tuned for that. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.